So we should be recording. Yay. And just before I turn it over to Matt from Human Rights Campaign, this is again who we'll be hearing from in the order we'll be hearing from them. And with that said, I am going to turn it over to Matthew Rose from HRC, who's going to set the stage for this conversation and will be moderating the rest of the webinar. I'll be behind the scenes helping out, and then I'll come back on at the end for final logistics. So thanks so much. And Matthew, over to you, my friend.
Thanks everybody for joining us, whether it be morning, evening, afternoon, or wherever you find your headspace in, because I know that time is a weird concept for some of us right now. I am Matthew Rose. I am the Senior Public Policy Advocate at the Human Rights Campaign. But as many of you know, I began cutting my teeth in advocacy and this work over 16 years ago, doing HIV vaccine advocacy, and I have stayed a research nerd my entire life since then. Despite not having a PhD or other fancy thing, I love me some science, and I love talking about science and the power that research gives, and understanding rigorous work to do questions. But we find ourselves in an interesting time. And I think we find ourselves in a time that harkens back to some of the things I learned from researchers and the community long ago, is that we are advocates, always and forever will be, because we believe in doing the thing that every advocate has always believed in, and that is changing the world. And to change the world, we have to be of the world, a part of the world, and willing to fight for the world that we believe in, whether it is writing the most brilliant paper you've ever seen, editing an informed consent so that everyone can understand, helping someone get to a study, figuring out the next critical question. All of these things have to happen, and all these things happen in very different ways, but we are all finding ways to fight back, fight for our lives, and fight for the lives of the communities we care about. So today we will give you some great tools and resources talking about advocacy that's happening, ongoing, ways you can plug in, find yourself moving forward. One of the things I will challenge you to do today is all of you will have to find some comfort in being uncomfortable. For these are not normal times, and to act like they are would be foolish, slightly crazy, and outside of what we do, which is understanding and questioning the world around us. We have to find ways to move ourselves forward and to fight for what we want and the world that we want. And some of that means stepping out into places that have made us slightly uncomfortable. But I will remind you that these are our roots, these are who we are, and this is how we have helped change the world time and time again. And with that, I want to bring up a person who's going to give us a fabulous overview of tools and advocacy actions that we can take right now in this moment, for we are at a critical inflection point, and that is my good friend and colleague, John Mead from AVAC.
I think I'm muted. Thank you, Matthew. Let me see if can you see that?
Yes.
Can you see my screen? Okay, great. Thank you so much, Matthew. As Matthew mentioned, like these are crazy, unprecedented times, and this is the time to take action. And I'm here to talk about a call to action and tangible advocacy actions that you all can take right now to fight against all of the things that we are faced with. So just wanted to start, after this webinar, we will circulate a toolkit that includes FY26, as you may have seen last week. Was it last week? All the week. Time is a construct I do not understand anymore. In the last couple weeks, the Trump administration posted or sent out their FY26 fiscal year 26 budget. We at AVAC have created an advocates guide. We have a toolkit, a bigger toolkit that includes messages and advocacy how-to, research advocacy resources, and obviously the slides from this presentation will be sent to you as well. So let's first understand the FY26 president's budget and what's in it and how it affects all of the work that we have done and all the progress that we have seen since the beginning, right? So the U.S. administration proposed FY26 budget marks a sweeping rollback of federal investment in health, research, and global development, right? We've seen this in the last 100+ years, 100+ days. It's felt like 100+ years, but it's only been 100 days. For researchers and advocates and implementers, this proposal demands urgent attention and urgent action. So the budget proposes major funding cuts and policy shifts, right? Significant reduction to non-defense discretionary spending, right? In Congress, they put it in two buckets: defense money and non-defense money, right? So this budget proposes a $163 billion cut to non-defense discretionary spending, right? The Department of HHS, the Human and Health Services, that RFK Jr. is the Secretary of HHS, which oversees NIH, faces a 26% reduction. This is unprecedented, right? The proposed cuts indicate a shift towards the elimination of science and programming tied to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or woke ideology, right? Gender and climate, with an increased emphasis on this thing they called America's First priorities, right? These are priorities that put the interests of the United States and its citizens over every other national or global issue. It's essentially cutting the United States out of the globe and saying, we only care about us. We don't care about anything that happens around us, right? So there are also deep, deep cuts to health and biomedical research, right? Proposed research cuts includes almost $18 billion cut to the National Institutes of Health, right? Every year, National Institutes of Health budget has steadily increased. This is an $18 billion cut. CDC by $3.59 billion. The National Science Foundation by almost more than half at $5.2 billion, right? This is unprecedented, crazy. It's showing that there is an obvious shift away from research, science-based thinking, implementation, all of that. PEPFAR preserved only for existing beneficiaries and excludes prevention except for pregnant and lactating populations. Pauses U.S. payments to the World Health Organization and other UN agencies. HIV care, harm reduction, and health equity programs face deep cuts. Examples of this, the Ryan White program here in the United States, and SAMHSA, the substance agency in the federal government, grants. So what does this mean, right? So HIV prevention, R&D, and global implementation is at risk, right? Cuts to NIH, USAID directly threatens support for clinical trials, community engagement, and biomedical innovation. Equity-centered research is threatened. Eliminating institutes, whole institutes, focused on minority and global health severely undermines inclusive science and jeopardizes future impact. Inclusion is not just a nice to have, right? It's integral to achieving sustainable impact. And PEPFAR protections are now narrow. Only existing beneficiaries are covered. Scale-up and innovation are off the table. Funding for HIV prevention is also eliminated except for pregnant and lactating populations. So all other key populations that have benefited from PEPFAR programming, right? Adolescent girls and young women, LGBTQIA plus populations, people involved in sex work, injection drug users, the list goes on and on. Those populations are not thought of in the new iteration of PEPFAR and PEPFAR services. What are our advocacy priorities, right? We need to monitor the full. This is just the skinny budget. This is just the top level numbers, right? We haven't gotten to the nitty gritty, like what are they cutting, why they're cutting it, all that verbiage hasn't even been released yet, right? So we need to continue to monitor and continue to fight the full FY26 budget release for agency level detail and justification. Engage appropriations and other relevant committees in the US Congress, right, via coalition supports. I'm the co-chair of the Federal AIDS Policy Partnership, right? We're actively engaging with administration in these committees. The Global AIDS Policy Partnership, which AVAC is a secretariat, we're engaging with the Congress, right? The Global Health Technologies Coalition, which I'm a steering committee member of, right, are continually going to the Hill, and also Save HIV Funding, which is a domestic coalition of advocates and researchers and community members working to exactly what it says, save HIV funding, right? And also support FY26 Dear Colleague letters on research global health funding. There are always letters circulating in the US Congress for Congress members and senators to sign on to, right? Circulating those and encouraging our champions to continue to champion that as well. So what are our key messages? And a more thorough outline of those messages are in the toolkit you'll get at the end of this call. Is NIH funding fuels innovation and economic growth, right? Cuts to NIH will make America, you know how they like to say, make America safer, stronger, and more prosperous? Well, this is going to make America less safe, poorer, and sicker, right? Impact of these cuts will be devastating and will reverberate widely. So now is the time to advocate and to elevate the message and mobilize our folks, right? What can you do? What can you on this call do? So the first thing is to engage with Congress, right? Call and email your senators and representatives, especially if they serve on any of the appropriations committees, which at the end of this slide deck, you will see like the names and pictures and what states and jurisdictions they represent. So if they are members in your jurisdictions that sit on this committee, it is incumbent upon you to reach out to them, right? Because they work for you, right? Organize in-district and in-state meetings, right? These representatives don't stay in Washington all the time. And they have offices, fully staffed offices in the districts all over this country. So you could organize in-state and district meetings, and we're here to help you organize and help you with talking points if need be. Invite your congressional members. We have a lot of researchers on this call. Invite congressional members to visit your research lab or your clinic, right? So that they could see the work that's happening. They could see what these monies are going towards, right? Hold events during congressional recess periods, right? They're not always in DC. Sometimes they have to go back to their jurisdictions, their districts, their states, right? Hold events during congressional recess periods. And we know some Republicans are now allergic to holding events and town halls because they're scared of what they're going to hear, but have the events anyway, right? Galvanize folks in the district, in the jurisdictions, because those are the folks that are going to be voting next year, midterm elections in 2026, right? So we need to galvanize those folks in our own backyard. What are some of the advocacy asks? Please, these are what you should be telling your congressional representative. Please do not support any cuts to federal programs, excuse me, for HIV and TB research, HIV prevention, or HIV care. All of these programs play an important, excuse me, play an important role in providing access to life-saving, cost-saving prevention and care. Fully fund the National Institutes of Health and the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Excuse me. Allergies. And call for NIH to reverse and stop terminating research grants. Do not support the proposed reorganization of the Department of Health and Human Services and continue to fund these programs through their current funding lines, right? What they're doing right now is called impoundment. Like these monies are allocated to these agencies already by Congress, congressionally approved, congressionally mandated. They are breaking the law by not allowing these funding lines to continue. And as I mentioned, local advocacy matters as well. Submit letters to the editors and op-eds to local papers. Joe Smith in rural Washington State is not going to his local diner and opening up a New York Times. That's not happening. They're opening up their local newspaper. So if you can write in that local newspaper and show Joe Smith why cutting NIH funding will affect him and his family, the future of HIV vaccines, the future of cancer cures, the future of hypertension therapeutics is at risk, that is important. Join local podcasts that discuss current issues, right? I know I have like 7 podcasts on rotation, right? Podcasts are the future, right? Organize local forums on the power and impact of research. Organize a local power of research rally and invite the local media. Hold a virtual advocacy power hour to call congressional offices. We've seen folks, 50, 100 folks, get on the call, get on a Zoom and call their representatives together and offer real-time support in the chat of like, oh, they're asking me this question, what should I answer? And people responding in real time. These are things that you could do to support each other in the advocacy. So what comes next? As alluded to, next week is an important advocacy moment. The Health and Human Services Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy, is testifying on the FY26 budget in front of the House Labor Appropriations Subcommittee and the Senate Help Committee. These are very important committees, and AVAC has already submitted talking points for Ranking Member Bernie Sanders and Representative Pocan of Wisconsin, who is also the chair of the HIV caucus, the Congressional HIV caucus. We have submitted questions related to research to be posed to RFK Jr. during these hearings. But what we're also doing is we're drafting, and we have a sign-on letter that we want to have hundreds of people from all over the country signing on to so that they can make their voices heard and to be submitted to the final record. We want to be able to hear Bernie Sanders say during that hearing, there is a sign-on letter from over 200 organizations and individuals opposing the restructuring of NIH, the cuts to NIH funding, all of these things. So if you would like to put your name and your organization on that sign-on letter, that's something you can do today, right? That will have an impact, right? So just do this QR code, use your phone to scan the QR code. I'll also put the link in the chat when I'm finished presenting, so that you all can just click the link and go straight to the link to sign on. But you have until noon on Tuesday, when I will then send it off to the staff members of those relevant committees so that they can be submitted to the final record. And this is one important step that you could take to ensure that RFK Jr. is on the record saying, or on the record talking about these questions will be on the record, so that if he says no comment or whatever he wants to say, it'll be on the record that he is denying to answer, or he's giving some crazy asinine answer to these questions, as we suspect. And then as I mentioned, all the resources are part of this. We didn't have time to go through all of this, but there are even scripts for you when you call your representative, when you write your representative. All the resources will be sent to you after this call. Thank you all so much. And back to you, Matthew.
Thanks so much, John. And just, I'm going to drop in the chat for everyone. We talked about congressional resources coming up. So when members will be back in their districts, most members come back to the district every weekend, however, but this is an extended period where they'll be back in the district, putting the dates in the chat for the next one. But like we said, there is important action to be had this coming Tuesday, where we will have, for the first time, have RFKA, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, on the Hill answering questions from lawmakers. And so it's important to both tell lawmakers why they need to have a spine and ask tough questions, but also to give them kudos for doing this. Next up, we have one of my faves. If you haven't met Sybil Hosek, you have been missing out. We have talked about what it means for young people to be in this world, what it means to provide tools for young people, and why this matters. We have a whole generation who seems to be losing touch with, and our implementation of what they need is being lost. And Sybil does the great work to make sure that young people have the tools and resources they need to make educated, important decisions about their lives and do it in a way that actually makes sense to young people. It's a beautiful thing to watch. She always gets me super excited. But she's also going to talk about kind of not only what the threats, and by threats I mean the entire annihilation of a research arm that we had, but also what's happened to LGBTQ research in general. If you saw the New York Times article that came out on Monday, most of the cuts to research have happened to LGBTQ research out of NIH. They're really coming at us being able to talk about, understand, study, and help and improve the lives of a whole group of people. And Sybil has been at the forefront of fighting all this back. So with that, I pass over to the lovely Sybil Hosek.
Thank you, Matthew. That was much more than I certainly needed on this Friday morning. But it's so good to see your face and many of the faces on this call. Given the short notice, I don't have any slides, but I did put together some notes that I wanted to kind of go over with you about what we've been doing in terms of advocacy over the past few weeks, and then happy to answer questions when we have the panel later. So my name is Sybil Hosek. I'm a professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, and I've lost, like many people on this call, many grants, and my work focuses on young people in the United States as well as in several African countries. But for today, I mean, there's, like you said, Matthew, there's been a lot of, I think, really good press around the particular areas of NIH that have been decimated and focused on. But today, what I really wanted to focus on was the Adolescent Trials Network, because it's my home and something that's so important to me. I'm currently the co-PI of the network, along with Lisa Hightow-Weidman, who's at Florida State University. And we want to talk about what we've been doing to try to advocate for its existence. So for those who aren't familiar with the ATN, it's the only US-specific HIV research network that's focused on young people, and particularly adolescents ages 12 to 24. It was established in 2001 with an initial focus on adolescents and young adults who were living with HIV. It sort of was an offshoot from the pediatric ACTG, but has made major contributions over the past 24 years in HIV prevention as well. And on March 21st, along with many of you probably on this call, we received a termination letter from NIH saying that the network was incompatible with NIH's priorities around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so obviously that was traumatizing and shocking, and we knew there were changes coming. We certainly didn't expect that the entire network would be eliminated. And Lisa and I felt really strongly that labeling a decades-old research network as a DEI initiative was a gross mischaracterization, and putting a political label on really strong scientific work. So we felt that it was a mistake and it needed to be appealed. And so I just want to walk through kind of the three prongs of what we've done so far, and then we can talk about questions or whatever. So the first thing we did is, for those who have gotten these letters, you have 30 days to appeal, or to submit a request to appeal, basically. And Now, actually a lot of templates out there that folks have been sharing within the community to be able to figure out what to say in these, but we didn't have those at the time. Lisa and I just thought we need to talk about what the ATN does and the work and why it's still important for American youth, since we're now focusing on the health of Americans. And so we pulled together this appeal that really focused on all the work that we've done in the past, the studies that we were currently conducting, how infectious disease, along with comorbidities such as mental health, substance use, were still highly relevant and critical for youth in the US. And then we also shared a lot of our past studies showing the cost effectiveness that we've calculated for many of our interventions. I want to say, because unfortunately, not everyone has had this luxury, but Lisa and I had incredibly strong support from our institutions backing us in this appeal. And we had legislative teams as well as legal teams reviewing our appeal language before it was submitted. And we did everything on a very expedited timeline. And we were able to get the appeal in within a week of our termination letter. So then once we got that appeal in, we thought, okay, now we need to turn to the press. And certainly right when all these letters were coming out, there were a lot of requests for interviews, but we really wanted, we were choosy in who we wanted to meet with, because we didn't want to just be a snippet. We wanted somebody to be able to talk with us and understand the ATN and really present it the way that we wanted it to be seen. And so we actually ended up doing about 12 interviews in a week time. And every one of them had a slightly different angle, because a lot of folks were sort of overlapping in what they were looking for. And so we were looking for sort of different angles. We thought carefully about the sources that we were speaking with. And when we weren't sure, we asked around, do you know this reporter? What is their work? We looked up their work. And we crafted talking points for these interviews, much like the work that John has shown. We did that for the ATN. And then ultimately we developed a small slide deck that we were able to share with reporters to use as background, which I think is really helpful. And I would encourage folks to be able to do that for your particular projects as well. We also had, for our network, we have sites all around the country. And so we did have site PIs that were willing to talk to the press, some, as well as protocol chairs. And so some of them conducted interviews. And we had young people. One of our youth consultants I see is on the call now, but we also had some study participants. We had one teenage study participant who was willing to speak to a reporter with her mother about her experience on an ATN study. And I think that was really powerful. And then after we felt like we had said everything that we could possibly say to the reporters, we really dug in and moved on to our legislators, which was something that was very out of our wheelhouse for Lisa and I. And it's so important that we partner with folks like all of you on this call who feel much more comfortable in that space. Because this was new. This was new for Lisa and I, but we did the best we could. We, started off because the prime award for ATN goes to Florida State University, where Lisa is. We started off meeting with local congressional people from Florida and, either them directly or their staff. Then we had contact with 2 or 3 US senators from other states as well. And I want to stress that we had contact with both parties, both of the primary parties in the United States, Republicans and Democrats. And I think that's really important, because the work that we're doing affects everybody. And I also want to say that everybody that we spoke to was incredibly supportive of the work that the ATN was doing and saw its relevance, regardless of political affiliation. So I want to make sure that we're, not excluding anybody and making sure that we're seeing who has to be reached out to. And I agree with everything that John said in terms of making sure that happens at a local level. There was a lot of promises to sort of escalate our concerns within their offices, to people that they knew, to their committees. Do we know if those happened? No. But people seemed engaged and they seemed willing to do those things. Now we're in a waiting space. We oscillate from pain and depression to hope. We usually start each morning very hopeful, and then by the end of the day, when we haven't heard anything, in despair. But all we can do is hope for success. And if we do, if we are successful and the ATN comes back, I don't know that we'll ever know what worked. But I like to think that it was everything, all of it, and also all of you who have been advocating for us as well. And I don't know that we'll ever know what the tipping point was. I think some of the things that we've been thinking about in the meantime, should we be so lucky and grateful as to get the ATN back, is what will it look like? Because we are under a different administration, right? And NIH priorities have shifted, whether we want them to or not. And so we don't know, would we get the whole network back? Would we only get a portion of the network back? Will some studies be able to go forward and others not? So we don't know yet what we would be asked to change if we're given the opportunity. But we are hoping for the opportunity because we feel strongly that we have to survive to live another day. And we can't do that if we don't have the network to be able to move forward. So I'm going to stop there, Matthew, and I don't know if you want to just wait for the rest of the panel to talk or, however you want to do it. I'm open.
Yeah, I think Jim has us queued up. We're going to have a big discussion at the end, but
Okay,
thank you
great.
so much, Sybil.
Sure.
I'm going to bring up some of my favorite friends from TAG, Lizzie, who could talk about just the groundbreaking TB research that we were on the tip of, that we've now decided, hey, let's kick in the teeth 30 years worth of work. And Breku, who's also going to talk about kind of HIV research. TAG, if folks don't know, is another advocacy organization that has a deep, sorted, no, we'll say sorted, because they've done some things to kick some researchers in the teeth and kick some government people in the teeth, but have really helped create the dynamics at NIH that have had such an open process. And Lizzie and Riku have done a great job of making sure that great history continues in these two important fields as we move forward and try to continue research funding. And so I have a lot of important lessons I've learned about how we've done research advocacy to keep the wheels turning behind the scenes all these years so that we can have the labs going, we can have the trials, we can have the results, and that community can understand what they are. So passing over to my great colleagues from TAG.
Thank you so much, Matt. First off, I just wanted to thank everyone for attending today. You'll see that our colleague Richard Jeffries was supposed to present, but he took an ethical stance today and is not going to be presenting on the call. And I think it's important for us at TAG to state from the jump that we fully support the right of anyone who seeks out gender-affirming care to be able to access it, including minors. And that is a stance that we are firmly committed to. So moving forward with our slides. So we're going to be talking about both HIV and TB today in terms of what impact there has been on the sort of research enterprise globally. We'll cover both kind of which networks and which trials have been impacted, and then we'll also have some notes about ways that folks can kind of stand up to this and fight back. So I'm sure that many of the folks on the call are already familiar with the kind of research infrastructure that a lot of this crucial science has been depending on. But just to sort of go over some of the main networks and grants that we'll be talking about today, that includes ACTG, which currently stands for Advancing Clinical Therapeutics Globally for HIV and Other Infections. It used to be known as the AIDS Clinical Trials Group. It also includes HIV Vaccine Trials Network, which we will be talking about how that's been uniquely impacted. HIV Prevention Trials Network, the International Maternal Pediatric Adolescent AIDS Clinical Trials Network, that has also been particularly affected. And and we'll talk about why and what's going to happen there. And then many other NIH collaborations, partnerships, grants, et cetera, including Martin Delaney HIV Cure Research Collaboratories. We'll also, folks might have seen most recently in the president's passback budget that there was a proposal to completely defund the Fogarty International Center, which would be coordinating these international partnerships. So we'll get into that a bit later. So just to sort of review what action has been taken so far, initially there was a delay for the notice of awards for 2025. So that already had kind of set off some red flags for researchers. And then similarly to other grants and awards from the federal government, even after the notice of awards were received, the funds themselves were extremely delayed and have been sort of stuck in the pipeline. There's also been a prohibition under an executive order from the Trump administration against funding any South African partners or research sites. And so basically trials that are collaborating with South African partners would require a revision to be able to receive their rewards. And then most recently, we just heard about the new restriction that subawards from grantees to subgrantees that are located outside of the United States will not be awarded any funding. And this is sort of extended through to when a new policy for international awards can be generated by the administration. It's due before September 30th, but it's important to note that many of these partners and these networks will not be able to sustain the kind of research infrastructure that they need until September 30th. And so this timeline is extremely troubling, obviously for those sites that will definitely not get funding in South Africa, but then also for sites that would otherwise get funding if the new policy was generated earlier. So any awardees that had already been proceeding with their awards prior to the international restrictions will be able to proceed, but any applications for supplements would not be awarded until that new policy is published. So again, extremely troubling. And it's important to note that even those that were already awarded their funds would only be able to proceed until the next renewal in December. So as many folks who have worked directly on clinical trials know, that is a wholly insufficient kind of level of stability for a clinical trial to proceed. So just to kind of go over what is at stake here and what can be lost if we do not have these really critical research partnerships in place for HIV and TB clinical trials, we wanted to go over some of the kind of highlights. So first is the SMART trial, which is funded by NIAID and utilizes the Insight network studies, and basically is studying immediate versus deferred antiretroviral treatment, and then continuous versus CD4 guided antiretroviral treatment. HPTN 052 is a study of therapeutic prevention of HIV transmission in serodiscordant couples. And it has relied on a number of study sites outside of the US. Also, the efficacy of PrEP in men who have sex with men in sites outside the US. Efficacy of long-acting injectable cabotegravir PrEP in cisgender women, men, and transgender women. That includes study sites outside the US. HIV vaccine efficacy trials, and that's especially important because it's studying kind of efficacy in response to variants of HIV globally. And those are under attack from a number of directions. The sort of anti-vaccine stance of current HHS administrator RFK Jr., and then also this this sort of pause on international research partnerships. And then new and improved shorter regimens for TB treatment and prevention, which we'll talk more about in a second.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, evening, afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. My name is Rico Boone. I'm standing in for my colleague, Richard Jeffries, presenting along with Lizzie today. So, you know, a lot of the research that has been funded by NIH and DAIDS, as Lizzie just mentioned, has relied on participation and sites all across the globe, particularly in South Africa. So when we look at particularly HIV research funding in South Africa, by these numbers, we see that there are 22 research sites, 24 clinical trials that have been funded in South Africa. And this amounts to about 25 to 50% of participants from these trials that hail from South African sites. And we know that the proportion is even higher for trials focused on pediatric and pregnant populations, upwards of 50 to 90% of participants. And much of the same is true when we look at TB-specific trials. So, you know, again, 25 research sites in South Africa, 12 clinical trials, with 30% of participants hailing from South African sites. Again, proportion much higher when we're talking about pediatric and pregnant populations. You know, some of you, some folks may know, you know, this meeting is taking place during the HIV Vaccine Trials Network full group meeting this week, which is virtual for the first time in a while, pretty much since COVID. They've decided to go virtual. And I think that it would behoove us to sort of understand why that's the case, right? Sort of we're thinking about the pressure that they are under to conserve money, conserve funds while they're still waiting for NIH to remit funding that is long overdue. And this is true not just for HVTN, but also for the HPTN. And as we've heard earlier, the Adolescent Trials Network was also completely disbanded abruptly. So we know that, you know, science is definitely under attack from all directions, including our colleagues in South Africa on whom the whole world relies on their participation. One of the standout messages from one of the sessions this week during the HVTN meeting was from a researcher and several researchers who reiterated the same thing, that we will not discover an HIV vaccine without the participation of South African researchers and participants and communities, right? And so the same is true for HIV cure research as well, which often relies on participation from volunteers outside of the US. And so, you know, when we look at the direct impacts of these issues on ACTG, HVTN, and impact trials, we know that, you know, there are several, you know, as I just mentioned, the full spectrum has been impacted, right? When we think about treatment, there's dolutegravir in neonates, oral cabotegravir in children and adolescents, long-acting injectable cabotegravir and rilpivirine in children, adolescents, and pregnant women. These are all, you know, these are areas that are being affected by these shifts in investment. and the U.S. government actions. Preventive vaccine modalities designed to induce broadly neutralizing antibody production, much of which has been covered during the HIV vaccine trials network full group meeting this week, as well as injectable cabotegravir for PrEP. Again, also looking at broadly neutralizing antibodies for cure research as well. A lot of this research that is, being completely disrupted really sort of covers the gamut, right? From treatment, prevention, cure, vaccine, and also when we look at comorbidities. So, hepatitis B, major depressive disorder, and including hormone therapy, for instance, for transgender and menopausal women with HIV. These are all areas that are significantly currently actively being disrupted by these disruptions.
Thank you, Rico. And talking a bit more about the impacts on specifically TB clinical trials and oh, okay, thank you, Matt. So shorter and safer regimens for TB treatment are desperately needed. So up until quite recently, we were relying on suboptimal drugs that had particularly harsh side effects, including peripheral neuropathy, lifelong hearing loss, in the case of drug-resistant TB treatment, and a number of other debilitating side effects. So some of the studies would be covering, studying an optimized regimen combining new drugs for extensively drug-resistant TB, which is particularly important right now because we're starting to see resistance to bedaquiline, which is the current backbone of treatment regimens for drug-resistant TB. Shorter and safer regimens for TB prevention, so that that is medication that is taken when someone is exposed to the TB mycobacterium but is not yet symptomatic or has active disease, and regimens specifically for children. These studies really would not be possible without involvement from international partners and specifically from South African trial sites, including a 2-month treatment, which for drug-sensitive TB, which would be a really important reduction in time of TB treatment for children, and that would reduce their exposure to some of the more toxic and higher side effect parts of those of that regimen. And then for drug-resistant TB, a 4 to 6 month treatment regimen with a tailored duration according to severity of disease. And again, that would be a really important reduction in treatment time. So trials that are not even sponsored by the US government could also be under threat because the sort of scaffolding of a lot of these trials relies on the existing public fundings to South African research sites, and pharma, philanthropy, other governments really rely on that infrastructure to be able to fund their own studies. And additionally, the core research and core funding that's provided to clinical trials and to some of the more basic science within TB research is critically important for even some of these non-US government sponsored trials. And so in the meantime, while this new policy is being released, we risk losing that existing infrastructure, losing staff with subject matter expertise, losing another generation of scientists, losing the trust of communities and the ability to successfully engage communities to determine what will be most effective. We lose the ability to share data. We lose our existing biorepositories. There are huge implications for what even this pause could mean for our research infrastructure. And South Africa is uniquely important because without their involvement, these studies would not be sufficiently powered to be able to produce meaningful results. There are just not, there's not enough infrastructure and or there is not enough of a population to be able to study to power those trials that will importantly benefit everyone, even in countries that would not be able to power a trial. And this will lose years of existing work and tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in investment. And as they try to seek out new options, we will be in the process losing time, losing money, and losing lives, unfortunately. We do have an issue that's going to be made available next Thursday at 8 a.m. So please do look out for that. It will provide information about TB and HIV clinical trials and research programs that are impacted by these government funding restrictions, including those to South Africa. And it will have some suggestions for urgent actions that alternative donors can take, including agencies, non-US governments, philanthropies, to preserve these scientific advances and prevent the collapse of this really important infrastructure in South Africa. It identifies the priority clinical trial sites and many of the specific clinical trials that are at greatest risk and need alternative funding to be able to proceed. And it spotlights which specific research sites and clinical trials would be affected by a U.S. government ban on funding to South African researchers. So we'll very quickly go over advocacy strategies because I know we don't have much time or any time, but John really covered everything. We just wanted to emphasize that there is no one way to engage in advocacy around this. We know that many different people will play many different roles, and also to emphasize that this is really the moment where civil disobedience and any form of advocacy that someone can engage in are justified and are needed. So Rico, I don't know if there was more you wanted to expand on with that.
Yep. I mean, I'll only add that, those quotes, were taken from, that you just saw, were taken from a training that TAG recently participated in, as a lot of these civil disobedience events are being planned and taking place, here in Washington and across the country. And so, we wanted to impart those kernels of wisdom that, again, as Lizzie said, you can get in where you fit in. There's multiple opportunities. Every little bit counts. I think it's easy to sort of fall into a state of, shock, which was the whole intent of all of these actions at the federal level, sort of shock and awe. Flooding the zone, with all of these, horrible decisions and actions that are disrupting everyone's lives. And so, get in where you fit in. Every little bit counts. Every sort of form of activism doesn't need to look the same. This might include, some folks who may want to, join, protests and civil disobediences. I saw there was a message in the chat asking if there were any upcoming ones planned next week for the hearing that's taking place on May 14th. So if you're interested in participating in something like that, we can definitely, take your contact information, reach out to us at TAG at our emails. We'll provide those at some point. And then we can put you in touch with, folks like ourselves and others who are organizing such activities. But you may also want to write op-eds, and submit those, post on social media, really sort of any effort that's going to tell your story and educate your family, friends, and community about what's happening. And, so your activism doesn't have to look like boots on the ground. We recognize that, but there are many folks who are putting shoes on the ground and joining forces in order to push back against this regime. A lot of this sort of depends on where your values align, right? We know that all communities are being attacked through these sort of disruptions of research. LGBTQ research is being attacked and completely terminated. Specifically, related to transgender populations, sexual and gender minorities, including Black MSM and other MSM, huge studies that are being disrupted that were in the works, being planned, implemented, that were completely had the rug sort of pulled out from underneath them, right? And so we know that, we can rely on our media contacts. If you have folks who work at different media outlets, feel free to also enlist their support. Again, sort of making sure that your values align with the values of those journalists who will be covering these stories. And ahead of May 14th hearing next week, you can submit a statement, questions to this email address at the Senate, which hopefully will be exert some influence on what's going to happen next week.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, you do not need to reinvent the wheel. There are very helpful templates that you can use to be able to submit that testimony. And also, folks are available to help you craft any op-eds or letters to the editor. I am here, Rico's here, John is here. We want to help support folks however we can in being able to share their story and share their perspective of why this disruption to critically important research is so dangerous, both to Americans and to all people across the world. So this is just an example of some of the protests and civil disobedience that have been taking place in response to some of these policies and administrative overreaches. And we will continue standing up and fighting back, and we hope that you will join us in doing so. Apologies for going over time.
Thanks so much, friends from TAG. We have up one of my favorite researchers from Zimbabwe, Narato, who has done amazing things in partnership with the US, has done amazing things as both a researcher and an advocate, and shows the ability to both do amazing research clinical trials, but also do advocacy work in her country. So I will pass it over to her next as our last segment. As folks, after this, we will go into our Q&A. It'll be slightly truncated, but that's fine. We'll answer as many questions as we can, but please drop them in the chat now, and we will start queuing those up. But pass it over to Narato.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you, Jim, and everyone for arranging this webinar. Speaking last is hard, but in this case, it's very, very easy because every speaker before me, Sybil, John, Lizzie, Rico, you've mentioned almost everything that I was going to talk about. But nonetheless, I'm going to talk about my experiences here in Zimbabwe as a researcher, what I experienced after the executive stop work orders. But before I start my discussion, really allow me to start by thanking the US government and the American people for all they've done for public health in Zimbabwe and Africa at large. I'm grateful to the American colleagues. There are many here. Matthew, you've mentioned, but I can see on the list I've got so many colleagues. I'm not going to call out to you, but I'm thankful that we worked together. There are too many here to mention by name, both African colleagues and US-based colleagues. We all worked towards a common goal. It was a humane goal, and it is indeed a humane goal of improving the quality of life of African people. We have changed lives for the positive. We changed lives positively, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. Lizzie, she talked about work in the HPTN, in the HVTN, MTN. I didn't hear MTN being mentioned, but I should blow my trumpet, really. We're not supposed to do that, but I will blow my trumpet that I've made huge impacts here in Zimbabwe and in sub-Saharan Africa through the work that I've done under the NIH, in the MTN, HPTN, HVTN networks, and other USAID funded projects. I'll remind you, in case you've forgotten, that I was among the teams. Actually, I co-led the Aspire study, and I think Sharon Healy is here. I co-led the Aspire study, the Hope studies, HPTN 084. Those 3 studies were instrumental in providing additional HIV prevention interventions, the dapivirine vaginal ring, as well as KEB-LA. I led HPTN 084 in Zimbabwe, and I must say that in Zimbabwe, we contributed 20% of the 084. We contributed about 800 participants of the 3,200 participants in 084. So we were instrumental in the licensure of the dapivirine vaginal ring, as well as KEB-LA. So all that work, really, I'm thankful, and I just wanted to say it so that people know I'm on the ground. I work in the clinic. I've just come from the clinic, so that people know what the US government has done for us, and we are grateful. And I would also like to mention that I co-led the Clinical Trials Hub with Sharon Hillier on Matrix. I was also a national PI for the Brilliant Consortium, as well as other USAID-funded studies like Project Engage, where we looked at adolescent girls and young women, how to make their lives easier, how to help them with adherence to pre-exposure prophylaxis, to the dual prevention pill. So we did a lot of remarkable work, and we made a difference. In the midst of feeling good, blowing our own trumpets, we were caught unawares. We were caught unawares by these drastic research funding cuts. But maybe when I look back, maybe I wasn't that unaware, because some of the great leadership here, they'd started hinting that there will be cuts. So like in Matrix, we'd already started planning for reduced cuts. Like I remember we had to cancel our investigators meeting, which was supposed to be held in Cape Town or Harare or Nairobi. So already, we suspected that something was going to happen. But when it came, we were not prepared. I mean, the day it came, we had to stop study activities abruptly. Studies were stopped while participants were still using investigational products. I know some of our participants in Matrix were still using the oak crest, the OSIS 1 ring. This is the ring that we're working on in Matrix 003. This is a dual prevention product that was going to look at non-hormonal contraception, as well as HIV prevention. And some of our participants we were instructed to stop the study with our participants with the rings in. We had to call participants into clinic to monitor safety, even though we had been instructed not to conduct any study procedures. We had to retain and retrieve the rings because this was the ethical thing to do. We couldn't let women roam the streets of Harare or KwaZulu-Natal or Durban or Johannesburg with the rings in situ. So we had to call the participants back, and we had to conduct final safety checks. And we did all that unsure with what I'm doing, is it allowable? Am I infringing on any rights? But because I felt ethically obliged to look after our participants, we called them, we conducted termination visits, and we let our participants go, because this was the ethical thing to do. But having done that, I'm really saddened, as as a researcher, because by so doing, by stopping the studies abruptly, the community, the research community, the stakeholders, the departments of health, the regulatory departments, Medical Research Council of Zimbabwe, Medicines Control Authority of Zimbabwe, all those stakeholders, the trust has been broken. The trust has been broken. We spent years building this relationship amongst us researchers, research communities, participants, and all the stakeholders that I talked about. Because of the dramatic and abrupt stoppage of work, they no longer trust us. Just a couple of days ago, I was speaking with my coordinator, and she was lamenting that we might not be able to ship our specimens because the Research Council of Zimbabwe is wondering, 2 months ago, you told us that you are stopping your studies. Now you want to apply for shipment. Why do you want to ship specimens when your studies were stopped abruptly? So already, there's suspicion. They don't trust us anymore as researchers. I'm saying maybe what was done could have been done in a better way. We should have had the time to engage the stakeholders, to tell them why this was happening and how it was going to happen. So I don't know, when the research funding is restored, I don't know what impact it's going to have on regulatory, the regulatory framework in Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in Malawi, Uganda, in the countries where we work, in Botswana, because trust has been broken. We did spend decades working in these communities, and now, all those myths and misconceptions about research, they'll start resurfacing. So the years and decades of work we've done to build trust, to build research literacy, have been undone in a matter of months. And looking at universities and research organizations, I see that the scientific progress that we made will regress. Thousands of scientists, researchers, implementers will be left jobless. Many of my colleagues in the US and in Zimbabwe are now jobless. And it's a sad moment for us all. And this was very abrupt without warning. So, besides talking the science, I'm really just explaining how it is for a researcher on the ground in Africa, in Zimbabwe, where we've been doing research. But also, I want to call to my government. Just this morning, I was reading the article on how the United States will cut 50 million in medications and medical supplies to support Zambia. I mean, come on, African governments. If this was my government, I was still going to say this. Yes, if those findings were correct, really, we should be embarrassed as Africans. I do not condone the misuse of drugs which were supposed to be free, and they were sold. And the participants, the patients who needed to get these, they were supposed to get this free of charge, but they got them at a cost. So I'm talking to African governments. We need to change. So sometimes, I'm sorry to all the advocates here, sometimes I think that we deserved it. We deserved it as Africans. We've got so many minerals in my country which we could use to fund research. So maybe we deserved it. I don't know. But I know advocacy here, we are going to go against these funding cuts. But in the same vein, I want to call out to the Zimbabwean government, Zambian government, South African government that we need to change our ways. We need to make sure that our people are well looked after. You can't expect your neighbor to look after your household. You need to do what you can within your household. So I'm deviating a bit, but really, I think that our governments, we should learn to look after ourselves. I've said that I'm worried about the disrupted treatment services, which will result in some participants failing to access treatment. Some will default their treatment, and we'll start seeing a surge of more virulent, drug-resistant viruses and the reemergence of the epidemic regressing in HIV prevention. So really, I'm worried, despite my outburst to the government, I'm worried about the drastic impacts that we are going to have from these cuts. So really, we need to take care of it. With regards to fixing the problem, the only way is for African governments, together with philanthropists and other funders, to step in and fill the gap. We have no other option. I don't see the US president changing his mind. We have been thrown in the deep end and we must swim. Sinking is not an option. We talk at length about decolonization of health research. We should do things the African way. Now is the time for us as Africans to lead African research, Afrocentric research for Africans by Africans. And I think if our governments can fund research, that will be a sustainable way to go about it. So the time for talking, time for lamenting, and time for toy-toying. If we're in South Africa, I would be toy-toying on the streets, saying we want funding back. The time for doing that may be limited, because the hour we've just been talking here, there have been so many HIV infections, so many STIs that we need to take care of. So let me stop here, because I could talk on and on and on about this. But in closing, I really just want to say the way the cuts were done, the abrupt nature has destroyed trust of researchers. And it will take time to reestablish what we had established in terms of how to conduct research in resource-limited settings, which abound in myths and misconceptions. So thank you very much. Back to you, Matthew.
Thanks, Narazzo. Always wonderful to hear from you. All right, folks. We have a bit of time left for some question and answers. So use that raise hand feature. Let me know if it's a question for the whole panel or particular panelists. We'll make sure we are brief to get as many as we can in, but feel free to hit the raise hand. Audrey Pettifor, you are first up.
Great. This was really wonderful to see everybody, and Narazzo, just because you just spoke, and I was having a conversation with a colleague in South Africa yesterday. I think, I attribute my career to researchers like you and Linda Gale and Helen Rees and James McIntyre in South Africa. I wouldn't have had the career I've had without Africa. And I love the point about decolonizing, because it's felt like a very academic discussion, at least in the academic world until now, especially those of us sitting in schools of public health who have global health programs, and we're all lamenting, oh no, what's going to happen to our global health programs? But I see this as an opportunity, like you said. How can we now support really support African-led science without the US funding? What can we do as US researchers who've been in this space to help you and help your organizations, even without grants right now? Like, I am until I'm not in a privileged position to have a tenured faculty position, which may happen any day. I'm funded, and I'm like, I want to help people, our colleagues who have helped us all these years. So honestly, like, if there's a way for US investigators and researchers and groups to get together, to whether it's helping write other grants to other organizations, whether it's helping, you all with strategic planning or writing things, or however you can use our human capital to help you all lead and do things the way you need to do them with your governments, with your organizations. I just would love to see us think of ways to support you all that center our African scientists and African organizations and leading in a way you wanted. Because while it's true, but that it's a huge loss of funding with PEPFAR going away and NIH, it also lets you all do the things that you weren't allowed to do because of the restrictions that the US government put in place under those funding conditions. So just want to throw that out there as if there's others who want to think about that or ways we can think about supporting you. You all may be like, we're good. See y'all later. But if there are ways to be supportive of, even in this funding gap, I would love to see that. Thanks. Thank you for being there and continuing to have to do the work and deal with the mess that our government has created.
Not sure any thoughts from others who have been in similar situation, how you helped advocates research in this moment. I know that I've been lending out many skills. I have many talents and many skills that have nothing to do with dollars. And so I will be a thought person, I'll be a thought partner. I will review papers and manuscripts and then say go. And just cheerlead for my friends who are doing amazing work, who have been doing amazing work in trying times. And we're at the US, we're like, we handled the cash, it was fine. Now we don't have any of the cash. So we're like, what are we giving to you? Anybody else want to jump in?
Hey, Matthew, it looks like George has his hands up.
Yeah. George?
And Linda D. So George, you're first.
Thank you. My name is George and I'm from Tanzania. So my question is, it's something that I had from my colleagues that they were saying that they are going, because what I hear is that the American people, they were trying to do the protesting to make sure that the USAID can come back. But what I'm hearing also from my other colleagues, so I need to make sure that is it the real information, because some of my colleagues are telling me that it's going to be terminated, so it's not going to be there forever. So someone was telling me that. So I just need to know, is it true that it's not going to be there at all in future, or it's just some misinformation that I'm hearing from my colleagues? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for raising that, George. And others obviously feel free to jump in as well. It is true that the entirety of USAID as an agency was dismantled. There is no such thing as the U.S. Agency for International Development any longer. Some parts of USAID's operations were subsumed under the State Department. But there has been drastic doesn't even begin to describe the downsizing of USAID's work that has occurred in this change. Bloodbath, yeah. It was initially reported that 83% of contracts, of USAID contracts, were terminated. I'm not sure what the current percentage is because there has been some rescissions of those terminations and then reinstatements, and there's been a lot going on since then. But I would say that it is still the case that the vast majority of USAID operations are no longer taking place. And even those that are cleared to continue operating, many have not seen funding since then anyway. There's been a huge backlog on US government payments due to some of this Department of Government Efficiency takeover of Treasury operations. So, and other related issues. So it is true that US advocates are fighting back. We are protesting. We are doing everything we possibly can to save the work of USAID and reinstate this vitally important work. But the damage that your colleagues described to you thus far is absolutely true, unfortunately.
Yeah, and it's important to mention that so this new budget that was released, kind of obviously what is echoing everything Lizzie says, it creates a new America First Opportunity Fund, which I roll, is basically saying that to replace the foreign assistance that existed, USAID, loans that prioritize US interests over humanitarian needs will be prioritized. So essentially, as I mentioned earlier, it's basically cutting the United States out of the globe, taking it out, and basically, we don't care what's happening around us. As if it doesn't interest us, it doesn't matter. It's not happening. It doesn't exist, right? And as I mentioned earlier, PEPFAR, which is obviously an integral part of foreign assistance when it comes to HIV and other comorbidities, is basically the existing beneficiaries will continue, but that limits innovation, that limits kind of like scale up, that limits the impact of the program, right? And prevention, HIV prevention specifically, is limited to pregnant and lactating populations. So all the key populations that have benefited from PEPFAR services, medications, treatments, all of that, LGBTQIA populations, sex workers, injection drug users, adolescent girls and young women, unless they are pregnant and lactating, will not get access to HIV prevention. And that puts the onus onto other multilateral organizations like the Global Fund, who's having a replenishment this year, right? Other UNAIDS, other institutes to fill that gap, which obviously a lot of that money came from the United States. The United States was one of the major donors of those institutions as well, right? So they're downsizing. So it's a perilous time. It's nothing we've ever seen before. But yeah.
We'll take one last question from Linda D, and then panelists, all of you think of any final thoughts you want to say, and then we'll go to Jim to close.
Hi, everybody. What a great call. I've really enjoyed it. I wanted to say that, I talked to somebody from Hopkins who had a USAID grant and actually is now receiving 30% of the 100%. So what you've been told is absolutely the truth. But I just wanted to reiterate to everybody to please sign John's letter. I mean, this is going to be our only opportunity to save the HIV networks, at least in the United States, the CFARs, the many grants there are in HIV. I mean, we need to have a push here, like I can't tell you. I want to tell you, John, that I'm now on T's in my in my address book, and so far I've got a good 750-ish investigators. So hopefully, I've heard back from a lot of them, but who knows how many will sign, will have the courage. But in any event, we need to do our part with that letter too and have as many organizations as doctors. This, again, may be our only chance to save 40 years of work. So thanks to everybody for all the work you do every day.
All right, folks, you get one sentence worth of final thoughts. Ready, set. Lizzie, you look good for this. Go.
Yeah, not sure what about my face said good for this. Just really want to reiterate that everyone has a role to play in fighting back against this life-threatening damage, and find your way to plug in, find your way to use your voice to push back, and we are here to support you in doing that.
I'll hop in next. I would just say, stand on your values, stand on your principles, and join the fight wherever you can. There's no room for leaving anybody out, including most particularly the most marginalized of our communities.
John.
So this administration is trying to take the humanity out of the work that we're doing. Don't let them. If you live in the United States, call your representative. There are things that you can do. We've outlined multiple things that you could do. If you live outside of the United States and you collaborate with US institutions, force those institutions to do what they need to do. Because the one thing that congresspersons care about is getting reelected. We have multiple opportunities coming up to take them out of office, stifle their voice. Let's take it.
Sybil.
I hope it doesn't sound, I hope it doesn't sound tone deaf, but we can't give up hope. If we give up hope, we lose what we're fighting for. And so please keep hoping, keep fighting, and together we have to do this.
Naratsa?
Mhm. Thank you. I'm an advocate at heart, and I totally support all the acts of advocacy that are being done. But I would also want to play the devil's advocate and call out to the African governments. Let's also do this for ourselves. We are proud Africans. We are Zimbo. We always say proudly Zimbo. So let's look after our people. While we sort this mess out, let's look after our people. Thank you.
And the last thing I'll leave you with is that you're researchers, advocates, amazing people doing this work, but we all stand on the shoulder of giants. We are a history of a people who have done this before, who have continued to do this before. Remember, more than 40 years ago, we were dying in the streets, in our cities, and caring for ourselves. We built institutions, we built funding streams, we built research, we created this, and we will not go silent in the night, and we will not give this back without a fight. It's okay to be a little uncomfortable, to do what needs to be done. Over to you, Jim, to tell them what's coming next.
Thank you, Matthew. And I'll just tag on to that. I mean, in the early days, there wasn't government funding because the government was ignoring us. And if they weren't ignoring us, they were literally laughing at people dying. So we didn't have funding or any support for 7 years. I do believe that the US government has a very important role to play. We're not alone in this. We all need to stand together. Our government is responsible for doing its part. We're all responsible. And so I think that is the message of solidarity. And at the end of the day, the people, the regime in Washington, the white Christian nationalist fascist regime in Washington, there's very few of them, way more of us, and standing together, we will win. With that said, I know you're all excited about the slides, the recording, and the resources that we have collected here. We will be sending out all registrants an email soon with all of those things for you, reminding that everyone who is in the United States, and again, like John said, people who have partners in the United States, we do have a really great inflection point next week with the Senate help hearing, but please stay in touch. We will do more of these. The TCA is back, and we will be doing some more interesting programming coming up. If you would like to be in the TCA loop and you're not already, please shoot me a note. I'll be happy to add you to our email list. And with that said, we are a few minutes over. I want to thank all of our wonderful speakers. Thank you, Lizzie and Rico. Thank you, John, Sybil, and Nurazzo. And of course, our lovely moderator, Matthew from Human Rights Campaign. Thank you all for being here. And really, thank you to all of the folks who showed up. Again, we had about 300 people register, about 120 showed up at any given time in live and in person. So we know a lot of you will be watching this on your own time. I hope everyone finds this useful, and let's keep coming together, standing in solidarity with one another and pushing back on this insanely horrible regime that has taken root in Washington, D.C. This is not forever. We will get rid of them. So with that said, have a great day, great evening, and a great tomorrow. Ciao.